Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. If you've never been here before, my name is Rory and thank you for watching. This is Varietal Literature's YouTube page. It's a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative. And what we do here on Tuesday nights is we read old folklore and fairy tales with a little bit of sound effects and so on, a little bit of music, things like that. And there's a live chat. So if you are watching this live and you want to join in with a little crop of potatoes that's growing down there, and discuss the story as we two of which we're going through today, then feel free to join in the live chat. If you're not watching this live, though, you have one major benefit, which is down in the description below, there will be timestamps that let you jump together ahead to whatever interests you the most. I'm going to do a very short little intro, a little bit of framing on tonight's theme, but if you care about none of that and you just want to get right to the stories, the first story is the Bagpiper. It's the shorter of the two stories. They're both reasonably short stories. And the second one is the Washerwomen of the Heath, which is the story that has sort of been in the advertising, if that's what got you here. But anyways, those are your advantages. If you're not watching this live, you will have the timestamps and you can jump ahead. Obviously can't do that when it's live, but if you are here live, you can join us in the live chat. And what we are looking at today is Brittany Folklore, which we've been sort of working through this book on and off every few weeks. For a little while. I've really enjoyed the stories in it. I do want to put up front the note that this is a collected physical copy of a collection of folklore from Brittany. And unfortunately, the copy that they were able to collect and scan into a digital format, they being the Google service that does this, Google funded anyways, unfortunately got a copy that has some torn parts of their pages. So there are very few parts, but a couple of parts in this tale where the sentences, we just have to kind of piece them together a bit, or they break up a bit weird. And I will do my best. I did, obviously read through these already. But if it catches me off guard, I apologize, but I will try to catch you up with what would have been there if there's a part missing. Anyhow. Before I go into any description of the stories, I'm going to say hello to the live chat because it is a little bustling in there. I see that we have Tammy Morelli, who called us her favorite people. Well, that's very sweet of you, Tammy. GS is here and correctly points out that Zombie Wolf beat me. Zombie Wolf says, Rory does tend to be quite tardy. Not so much to this. I was tardy last week and I'm tardy this week. But actually what informs me being a minute late is the stream delay. I'm usually here on time. What delayed me today was some technical issues that I hope do not return. GS says, not sure I'd drink a skeleton's offering. Well, it gets worse. Tammy Morelli won't be here Thursday. We will miss you Thursday, Tammy. I might do, there's a sort of basic dungeon crawler solo tabletop RPG that I might do on Thursday, because that's the kind of thing that interests me, but I don't know how interesting it is to anybody else. But that's a different show. Let's talk about this show. Also, Jump Store, I hope you're feeling okay today. Brittany. Brittany Folklore. Okay. Actually, first I'm going to talk about drunkenness in folklore. So, oh dear. Don't make me feel old, Jump Store. So, drunkenness and, their channel. I thought you said my channel. I was like, oh no. Okay. Drunkenness in folklore. Okay. Is not at all a rare thing. And I don't think that's too surprising, considering that many folktales, frankly, seem like they were told by drunk people to other drunk people about times they were drunk. I don't think that's an unfair thing to say. I don't even really think that's a punchline. A lot of them you read, you're like, this sounds like a guy telling a story in a bar, because that's what a lot of folklore basically was. We do have, and it's not an inaccurate one, we do have this sort of image of like, the old grandma knitting, or the grandpa, smoking a pipe and telling you tales of his youth and whatever. And yeah, folklore did travel that way as well. But a lot of this was also just, did you hear that Jimmy got in a fight with a leprechaun, right? Like, it's stuff like that. Jump Store says, Rory, I'm 30 now. I highly doubt you've been doing this YouTube for 11 years. I did have, I don't even think it's online anymore. I did do sort of a thing with YouTube 11 years ago, but it was mostly just me sending stuff to a friend's. But not this, no. Anyways, so folklore and drunkenness, they go together a lot. We've seen a lot of those stories in the Jürgen Hubert's collection, Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, which are all German folklore, and so on. I would say that, just roughly speaking, in my experience, I'm not an expert, folklore about drunkenness tends to fall into two categories. The first are what I call creating culture by lying to your wife, as a category, which is to say they are transparently tales about someone, I don't know, drunkenly gambling or cheating, all their money away or whatever, coming back with scratches on their back or something like that, something telling when they were drunk. And then they tell their wife that the elves stole it or a spirit was hanging on their back or whatever else, right? There's no evidence for that exactly, that accusation that it's just lies you told your wife about mistakes you made when you were drunk, but it really has that vibe. That's like the first type of drunken tales to me. The second, which is the subject of our tales tonight, the common theme between them, are stories of caution against being a drunk. And I think it helps to keep in mind that we're dealing with an era, I mean, it's still kind of the era now, but especially back then, you're dealing with an era where drunkenness was simply seen as a failure of character, a choice of people were making. As a result, they become cautionary tales about why you have to quit, you fool, basically. And that's what the theme of these two are going to be. For that reason, I do want to say that they are darker stories. They get kind of dark. They are funny, but they're darkly comic. The second one being the least funny and the most dark. Both of these stories come from Brittany culture, which is a people descended from the Bretons who currently occupy northwestern corner of France, but they have traditionally settled southern England as well, and I believe many people count them as one of the original sort of Celtic tribes. But let me know if I'm wrong about that. I'm no expert on Bretons. Anyways, they are around that region, but they are sort of their own distinct people with their own distinct folklore, and we've been picking through their stories over the last few months. I've said more on Brittany culture and Bretons in previous episodes when we read from this book, so I'm not going to repeat it here, but that's just sort of the region and stories that we're dealing with here. Instead of me doing that again, let's get to some stories, and I'm going to repeat this as an overall warning. Both these stories get pretty dark and grim. The second more than the first. And in some cases, especially in the second, pretty violent. I would not recommend these for kids. Teenagers are probably fine, but not for kids. Because as I've said, I used to say this every episode, and I probably should keep saying it because new people come in. And I'm sure some of you are planning to watch fun fairy tales with your kids or something. I should warn you, folklore is not fairy tales necessarily. Fairy tales comes out of folklore, but they are of a different type of tale. Folklore is all over the map and can be extremely adult and not at all for kids. So these ones tend more towards moral lessons for adults, so they're grimmer and darker and more violent. Zombie Wolf says this just in, people love to drink alcohol. Indeed, especially back then. One thing that I think is understated, actually two things that I think is understated about the excessive drinking of Europe around that time. Two things. First of all, almost all their wines and beers and meads were much lower alcohol content than we would have today. You know, we're talking some of them are 1 to 2% alcohol. And second of all, a lot of it was drunk, not just because they liked alcohol or whatever else. It was also drunk because alcohol had a sanitizing effect, and you kind of knew you weren't going to get sick from drinking it the way you might if you drank the wrong river water or whatever else. Now, that's obviously not entirely the case. People did just like being drunk. You know, it was a hard time to be alive, and being drunk is fun. But, yeah. You know, it was an era. There were other reasons to be drinking weak alcohol. Let's put it that way. It wasn't just that. You know, the impression that a show like Game of Thrones gives you is that everyone was just chugging wine all day. And that's kind of true, but there are reasons why their wine was the thing. And it wasn't just for being a drunk. Anyways, that's enough random facts from history. I'll leave the rest to Zombie Wolf tonight. Does enjoy a good random fact. Zombie Wolf says, Rory thinks his audience consists of Mummy's precious little snowflakes. So I know for a fact some kids watch my show. They don't, I don't know that, they wouldn't be in the chat, but I know for a fact they do. And I also know that I, by definition, have a lot of lurkers who do not comment or talk, and they're regular viewers, because I know that I regularly get, you know, minimum 50 views on a video, which means a lot of people, some of you might be watching it again, but I'm sure a lot of you are not. Not enough of you are watching it again to count for that. So I just want to make sure that I'm a big believer in the warning, right? I don't really like censorship, but I do believe people should be able to make informed decisions on the content they're consuming, and I want them to feel that they don't have to worry if they want to watch it with their kid. Jump Store, I was just going to ask, having a chai latte tonight. I wanted something a little warm and cozy. Just fleece it out, says Lurker. There you go. And we know for a fact that just fleece it out from previous conversations must be a child. No, I kid. Keep on lurking. Okay, that's enough of me talking. This takes place, you know, near the channel between England and France. So let's do a little bit of wind and a little bit of rain. I'm going to drink some water because we are still getting some smoke in our air, and that's making me a little congested, and then I'll read you a story. You know, Jump Story, I wonder if we could just gaslight the internet into pretending like this show's been here for 11 years. I don't know why I'd do that, but that was a thought that crossed my mind. Okay. It would open up the ability to make reference to memories that never happened. Our first tale tonight, and both our tales tonight, come from the book Popular Legends of Brittany. And the first tale is called The Bagpiper, which might be a surprise if you only associate that to Scotland. This tale comes with the content warning that both the tales come with, which is it's a bit dark, darkly comic, but dark. And it involves excessive consumption of alcohol as its core theme. There was a consecration festival held in the neighborhood, and the music and dancing continued far, far into the night. But when the stars brightly sparkling and the moon high in heaven warned the revelers that it was time to break up, the inhabitants of the different villages joined companies and took their way homewards. The village lasses wore pewter rings on their fingers, which their friends had given them at the fair, and the jovial village lads went on before singing at the top of their voices, but their merriment was at its greatest height when Leonard was one of the party. Leonard was the merriest and the most famous piper in that part of the world. He never knew what it was to be out of spirits. He played up at every dance, and he was always the most pleased of the whole party. Whenever there was a dance or wedding, he always came down from the mountains with his bagpipe, and he would play the livelong night. He was never tired of playing, but he was also never tired of drinking. And if it had not been for the sake of the music, people would not always have been so glad to see him, for when he had drank a great deal, according to his usual custom, he became insufferable, for he did nothing but rave and swear. At these times, he would swear by all that was dear that he would remain a merry bagpiper till his day's end. And if he ever felt that he was going to die, he'd drink deep as long as he could and mock death with the last wail of his bagpipes. He was a belligerent drunk. He had gone on with his usual recklessness on this occasion, or if possible, he'd been even wilder and even more jovial than ever, if jovial be the right word. Warning and persuasion were of no avail. "Leonard, beware for your own sake," his friends cried in vain, and he cursed and swore high and dry that he would die drunk in the midst of music and dancing, and no otherwise. This time he persuaded the homeward bound troop. His bagpipe squeaked and whistled all the way, and the lads sang in their Swiss fashion, and the white dresses of the lasses glimmered in the moonlight. But when they came to the crossways, where the roads parted, the bagpiper took the right-hand road, which led up to the heights of, I assume, the Alps is what they're talking about here, but maybe not, because they mentioned Swiss. The maiden stopped short, shrieked out, "Where are you going, piper? Here are the left-hand road that goes round the valley." But Leonard pointed to the right, where the tower of the village church could be seen in the moonlight. "Shall we not go this way?" he asked. "I thought it was near over the heath. Why would we go so much out of our way?" And the maidens replied, "'Tis not safe to go over the heath, bagpiper. The dwarfs haunt the place in the night, and 'tis very seldom anyone passes over the heath in night time without getting into trouble." Leonard burst into a hearty laugh. "Pray, what harm can the dwarfs do to anybody? They force you to dance." And unfortunately, the end of the sentence is cut off, and they can do you, I assume, harm, is what they're going to say, but who knows? It's lost. Laughed Leonard again. "I've wandered about alone many a night, over mountain and valley, over crossways, even by the gallows, but nothing's ever happened to me yet. I should like right well to meet with the little people, for they are said to own a great deal of silver and gold. It would be no bad thing if I filled my knapsack full. Where is the way to the dwarves?" "Leonard, Leonard," cried the maidens, "be not so foolhardy. He who plunges headlong into danger only rushes upon his feet. If you go to the dwarves, you'll have to dance till your breath is wholly gone." "Dance?" replied Leonard. "That's just what I should like. Pray, have the little people any musicians to play for them?" "They have the the wind whistles over the heath for their piper, and the night birds join their songs by way of accompaniment. I cannot dance very well to such music as that. The little people ought to know how well one can dance by a bagpipe. Farewell! If you will not go with me, I'm going over the heath. And with these words, he seized his bagpipe, played up a merry tune, and strode boldly up to the heights which led to the heath. Now the maidens and their companions raised a loud and lamenting cry and hastened away. Leonard strode fearlessly on through the moonlight, playing all the time on his bagpipes. The farther he went, the more jolly he grew, though the darker and more foreboding it grew. The squeaking tones of his bagpipe screamed shrill through the night air, and when he got to the middle of the heath, he saw huge blocks of stone that rose up in the pale moonlight, and not far from these were the dwellings of the dwarves. Leonard kept playing. It mistranslates that sentence with its scanning device here. Let me say that sentence again. Leonard kept playing louder and louder, till at once he perceived a town. At first like the soft murmur of a brook, then louder like the rushing of a torrent, and at last deep and fearful like the roar of breakers. He could hear low, tittering laughs. Suppressed whispers, and at length shuffling steps through the sand. The piper held his breath, felt a change in his disposition. He thought all this very strange. He looked anxiously to the right and left. The whole heath was alive and stirring, moving in every direction was something. He could not see what, for the moon was then just covered by a cloud. And all at once the moon shone out, and Leonard cried aloud with terror. On the right and on the left, before him and behind him, everywhere as far as eyes could reach, the heath was covered with dwarves, and all were rushing towards him. Leonard turned back and would have taken to his heels, but the dwarfs everywhere blocked up his ways, called out with their grasshopper-like voices, "This is a jolly piper, Leonard, who has come to play for us to dance." Leonard struck out about him, trying to keep off the dwarves, but they cried out, "You belong to us now, and now you shall see come to pass what you have always declared should happen. Play up and dance with us." And all resistance was vain. An invisible power constrained him. He put the mouthpiece of the bagpipes to his lips and began to play and to dance in spite of himself, and the dwarfs whirled around him in a circle, and every time he tried to stop, they shouted, "Play away, jolly piper! Play and dance as we do!" And so it went on the whole night, but the paler grew the stars, the weaker the tones of the whatever. I assume bagpipe. It's a word that's missing. And Leonard could scarcely lift his feet from the ground. And when the day dawned and the cocks began to crow, the dwarfs vanished, and all became still. The jolly mountain piper fell breathless to the ground. The bagpipe dropped from his mouth, his hands fell powerless at his side, and his head sunk heavily upon his breast, and all around him in the air resounded a kind of whispered song. "Sleep, jolly piper, sleep. What you so often sworn should happen has come to pass. Your last moment was spent in music, dancing, and drunkenness." And when the people came in the morning to look for the piper, they found him lying dead on the heath. The meeting with the dwarves had been his destruction. I see we are talking about some of the more brutal versions of the Disney adaptations, stories like Cinderella and stuff. I've read the one where they chop off part of their feet. I've actually read a couple of versions where they do that, where the stepsisters do that. Some of these I have not read before, though. There are so many versions of that tale. I would feign to say it might be the most common in Europe. Wild variations. It's a good evidence of, like, when people say, like, what's the original tale? Who the hell knows what the original tale was? There's so many versions of it. Beauty and the Beast, not so many variations on that particular version of the tale. That was written by a single author. I think it was a woman in France. I should know the name, but I'm very bad at pulling up names. Somebody tell me. But as a form for story, folklore stories, the Beauty and the Beast form is actually very common. And for example, I think probably more famous than the Beauty and the Beast is, I always get it wrong because I'm very bad with titles, but East of the Sun, West of the Moon, it might be the other way around, is considered a part of that format. And I can see the connection. But yeah, they're very interesting. I particularly like the variations. I don't try to bog this stream down too much by reading like 6 variations of the same tale. Just because I think people come here primarily for a story. But if you're like a nerd for narratives and historical narratives and how they develop and how they sort of change parts and, swap DNA and whatever else, it's really quite interesting how they manifest with each other. Anyways, that's enough. Let's get to the story that I think a lot of people came here to read, which is the one about a man so drunk that death doesn't recognize him. Lizzie Rose says, "You got it right, Rory." Well, that's good, because the last time I said it, I didn't. I think I said something like east of the west and west of the east, which was frankly hilarious. Lizzie Rose says, "I'm a narrative nerd." Yeah, I think I've definitely gotten that impression that we are kindred spirits in that way from some of your messages, for sure. I'm curious. Yeah, I find that there's a lot of like information that comes from looking at comparisons between how stories develop. I had the benefit, I'm rambling a little bit, but this is a contained story. I had the very delightful benefit of going to a sort of event at which I met an archaeologist for Scandinavia. They were a couple, and they were both historians and archaeologists of the region. And we were talking about a lot of stuff because it's something that was particularly interesting to me. But he pointed out something I knew but I hadn't really thought about before, which is one of the markers, one of the things that really makes Scandinavia kind of stand out and be unique compared to other places that take a lot of the same pieces of lore, is Scandinavia had regular interactions with the Sami people, but like Germanic culture didn't really. And so what happens is you see Germanic culture has a lot of interactions with Scandinavia, and so you see a lot of like crossover in themes and ideas and stuff and characters even. But there's there's peculiar traits, especially as you go further north in Scandinavia, that's most likely traced back to Sami influence, which was something I didn't know, and I really can't verify for you, but it was an interesting conversation from a trustworthy person. I was a little concerned, I know you're kidding, but a bit. I was a little concerned that the subject might be triggering for some people. If it is, you won't hurt my feelings. If this is not something you're willing, that isn't enjoyable for folks. It's obviously, as much as these stories sort of make light of it and treat it a certain way, it is obviously a serious thing that can cause a lot of impacts on people's lives. This story in particular is about a real jerk of a man. That wasn't what I was going to say, but I've decided to censor myself. Where it could be said that the last one was just a bit of a partier, this one's a jerk. Okay. Our last story of the evening is called The Washerwoman of the Heath. It also comes to us from Popular Legends of Brittany. This one, they're both dark. Obviously, if you watch the last story, he dies in the end. I don't know why you'd be skipping ahead to this and worry about spoilers. This one's violent. It's pretty violent, honestly. The actual violence at first is confusing, but once you put it together, it's gruesome. So, content warning, this is a violent story. A sober, temperate disposition is a very excellent thing. For he who gives himself up to gluttony and drunkenness runs all sorts of dangers, and he never knows whether he will reach home safe or not. Not merely that the foot becomes too light when the head grows too heavy, and a man loses his balance and stumbles and staggers about, but there are other risks to be run. When a man goes home in the night with too much under his hat, drunk. That's what they're saying, drunk. When the wine spirits out in the midnight start into life and open for him a pair of eyes such as he never has at other times. And then he sees all sorts of things which a sober man never sees or gives himself any trouble about. For the wine spirits leave a man no rest, but with their wicked brothers and sisters change themselves into nixies and kobolds, and thereby lure him on to destruction. The inclusion of nixies, by the way, is very interesting for tracing where this story comes from, but I won't go into it here. Let everyone take heed, then, that he goes home sober, else he may fare like William, the hero of this tale. William was a drunken swaggerer. He did no good his life long, but lay the whole day in the alehouse and spent his money for beer or wine or brandy. This propensity he had inherited from his father, who often drank a mug more than was necessary to quench his thirst. And you know, as the old cock crows, so crows the young. His father had broken his neck in a drunken fit, and it was a real miracle that William still had the use of his limbs. He had so many falls and mishaps himself. In the morning he was the first at the alehouse, and at night he was the last. He never failed to be at a fair, and when the uproar was right boisterous, you might be sure that William was there. and that he shouted and screamed the loudest of all. His mothers, his sisters, and his wife had all died in one short year, but this had not touched him in the least. He took possession of their property and only thought, "Well, I could drink more." And while the funerals were taking place, he sat behind his glass and sung in an insolent tone, "What if I have no wife at home? I even go out in search of one." And so said, so done. The magistrate and other respectable men warned him, but in vain he pursued the same mad course. And the more he was advised, the worse he behaved. It happened that the village fair fell upon Walpurgis Day, the 1st of May, the time when the witches are abroad, and when they practice their wicked arts on the rash and unwary. As at this time there is always a great deal to be done in the field, thrifty people took care to return home in good season. Not so with William. He had fallen in with a goodly number of sailors, not sailors, and dissolute people at an alehouse, and he was singing with the barmaids all kinds of frivolous songs, and so that he thought nothing about the time. What kind of song isn't frivolous? It's kind of the nature of music, isn't it? At midnight, all had filled their heads and bellies and had lain themselves down to rest. William had had his share, be sure of that, but still he never had enough. Vexed that the others had left off so soon, he started off on his way home, singing through the streets all kind of drinking songs. He yodeled and shouted and swept about right and left with his cane, so that if anyone had passed him, they would certainly have been hurt. Thus he came to a crossway where the road divided into two. Now one road was longer, but in good order and perfectly safe, and the other was shorter, but it went over a heath beneath the gallows, and people who passed that way in the night time had always heard singular noises, and in fear and trouble had reached the village in a full run. William, in his tipsy mood, troubled himself about nothing, but took at random the left-hand road, and as he went along, he made such a clatter with his wooden shoes upon the stones that he might have been heard a very long way off. Well, the night was dark. Neither star nor moon was to be seen in the sky, and the wind swept over the heath with a blustering sound. The brook, which flowed through its rippled on the stones with a kind of dreamy monotony, and the thorn bushes on the roadside trembled as a person does when overcome by fear. And between whiles nothing was heard but the far resounding steps of William, who took no heed of all of this, but reeled along in his drunken care for naught fashion. And as he came along by some old ruins, the weathercock creaked and called out audibly to William, "Turn back, turn back." But William did not hear it, and he went steadily on. He came to the brook, where the water murmured, "No further, no farther, no farther." And William groped with his cane for the crossing stones that lay in the brook, and strode boldly over to the other side. And a little way off, there stood an old oak tree, The wind whistled fearfully in the branches and whispered in William's ear, "Stay here, stay here, stay here." But William took his cane, struck at the branches of the tree, and switched off a couple of twigs, and went on. At last he came to the place on the moor that had always had a very bad reputation. In the neighboring village he had plainly heard the clock strike 12. William commenced whistling a tune. But just as he was in the midst of it, such a strange sound met his ear that he held his breath and listened to see what it could be. The noise, much to his surprise for how late it was that of a carriage. But the sound that the wheels made was peculiar, and before he could rightly make out what it meant, he could see a vehicle coming directly towards him. It seemed to be covered with a pall, and when William looked steadily at it, he found it was a hearse drawn by 6 black horses, and Death sat in front as a driver, with his hourglass in one hand and his scythe in the other. The skeleton coachman cried out, "Make way or die." "Oh, what are you doing here, friend Death?" cried William boldly as the hearse drove alongside. "I attack, I cut down," answered the skeleton. You are a robber and a murderer." "I am a reaper without mercy or forbearance." "In other words, you are a brute or a fool. But pray, what are you doing here?" "I'm looking for a man named William," replied the man of bones, and drove on. Well, William laughed aloud and walked on, and when he had struck deeper into the heath, where the brooks became wider, he saw 2 women hanging linen on the thorn bushes. "By my faith," cried William, "these damsels are not afraid of specters. Tell me, my dear little doves, what are you doing here so late on the heath?" "We wash, we wring, we bleach," answered both women the same moment. "By what, pray?" "The shirt of a dead man who at this moment still walks and talks." "A dead man, hey? But I must know who he is." "His name is William." And William broke out into a loud laugh as he'd done before, and went stumping along by the side of the brook. The farther he went, the plainer he heard the noise before him, which came from the washerwomen on the heath, who in the broadest part of the brook were beating the linen in the water. And not long afterwards William saw them himself. They washed and wrung out grave clothes, and sang in a fearful way, "We whirl in the dance, in the darkness of night, by moon's pale glance, by the stars' gleaming light, in rain and in snow, winter's cold, summer's glow, we wash, we spread their clothes for the dead, who today, full of life, rejoices in health's glow, like roses so red, in the morning are dead. Oh, woe to thee, William, woe, woe. As soon as these strange people got a sight of William, they hastened up to him, and holding out the linen they were washing, requested him to help them wring it out, twisting all the water from it, these grave clothes they washed. This is a trifling service, no one would refuse to such pretty children, said William in his tipsy good-naturedness. But when it is time for a man has but two hands, and he cannot serve all at once. So he laid down his staff and seized the grave clothes of one of the washerwomen, and tried all the time to twist the clothes the same way she did. But for he had presence of mind enough to remember that this was the only way he could escape being torn limb from limb, which is an idea that was never introduced before. While he was thus wringing and twisting, the other woman came up, and William thought he recognized among them his mother, wife, and sisters. And it seemed to him that they called out to him in a fearful tone, Woe to you, you reckless drunk! You have rejoiced over our death, because you could drink up our property, but the hour is come when you have drunk the last drop you will ever drink. And when they shook out their disheveled hair, which hung down long and wild behind them, it looked like a tissue of snakes, and they swung huge wooden mallets with which they pounded the clothes they were washing, and with angry gestures they cried out more threateningly and fearfully, Woe to thee, William, oh, woe! And this took away all of William's self-command. The sweat poured from his forehead, and as he raised one hand to his head to push back his hair, he forgot to twist the same way with the washerwoman. The very moment that he wrung the other way, the cloth was torn from his hands, and every member of his body was wrenched to pieces by the washerwoman of the Heath, and he fell senseless to the ground. The next morning, the maidens who went to the city to carry their milk to the market saw William lying in a hole under a bush on the heath. They knew him, so they supposed he had drunk too much brandy and had fallen there on his way home. And they went to waken him, and they saw that all his joints were dislocated. Full of terror, they ran into the village and called some of the neighbors. The magistrate came also, for he thought some crime had been committed. But when he saw how twisted and horrid the whole body was, he said, Let him alone, children. William is dead. He has been wringing grave clothes with the washerwoman on the heath. And there's the end of the story. Yeah, twisting every one of your joints out of place and tearing you apart, then beating you with hammers is in the top 5 of the most violent things I've read on this stream. I will say. Jumpstore says, not as gory as I was promised, though. I don't know that I said it was gory. It's grim and violent, and it was violent. I don't think anybody will debate that. I feel like it's a story that builds on pieces of folklore that we don't necessarily have. But because I do feel like there's some stuff in here that I should know more about. But yeah. GS says, well, all those years of ringing, it could be an Olympic event. That's a good point. They had very strong hands. Okay. Tammy says, your voices were outstanding tonight, Rory. I love your enthusiasm. Well, thank you very much. It is interesting to watch how, like, my original conception for the streams was, like, everyone wants a low ASMR voice. And then at some point I just decided to be more theatrical, and that's when people started watching. But yeah, I think it does mean that if people were watching this when they were falling asleep, I'd probably wake them up. I saw that Genera dropped in and Lizzie Rose. It's very good to see you folks. Thanks for, thank you very much for watching, and just fleece it out for dropping in. I know I made a joke. And of course, GS Jump Store, Zombie Wolf, and Tammy, if I didn't specifically mention you. Thank you. Yeah, GS says it was gruesome. More gruesome than I expected. I expected blood and gore, but cracking twisted joints is... Yeah. Yeah, that's true, Zombie Wolf. Also, I think I'm just better at being theatrical than being too low-key. I don't know what we're doing Thursday, by the way. I'm going to consider it kind of like a whatever Rory wants day. Now, you might say that's always the case, but I usually try to balance it between like what I know is interesting to people and what's interesting to me. But I might play something that I've been putting aside because I, just figured it wasn't very interesting to a lot of people. Lazy Rose says, I love your voices, Rory. Well, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you. And GS agrees. Yeah, I didn't do voices for a very long time. And then I tried to do voices for a little while, and what I was trying to do was match accents. And that is a nearly impossible task, because it is, like, to even do a couple of accents well is something that takes deliberate, specific training if you're not a part of that culture, right? Even actors don't get that. So I was like, this isn't feasible. So I just try to be more evocative of a personality than specifically, like, I wasn't trying to, like, speak in old British or maybe French accent or whatever would have been the Brittany accent. Oh, it's the little popcorn bro. Oh, I love to see him, Jump Store. Okay, Zombie Wolf, let's see what you have for random trivia today. Public intoxication is legal in Nevada. There are laws in place to prevent it from becoming illegal. However, any crimes committed while drunk will still be prosecuted. Yeah, I would say there's probably better ways to deal with public drunkenness than just flatly making it illegal, because, like, you want people to walk home when they're drunk, right? If you make public drunkenness illegal, then you're just kind of, like, creating problems. But I'm sure there are problems with both. I wouldn't say it's a topic I've thought too much about. But it makes sense that Nevada's that way. I've not been to Vegas, but I did drive through Nevada and saw Reno. And I was expecting more based on what I'd seen on TV. It was a strip of bronze-colored buildings that were quite impressive, surrounded by suburbs in a desert. And I like the desert. But no, I've never been to Vegas. I don't know how much I would love Vegas, but I would like to see Vegas at some point. It's a spectacle, right? As a person who can't eat most things anymore because of the celiac, who doesn't drink anymore, and never got much out of gambling, I'm not sure. I would probably just be going to shows, I guess. Lizzie Rose says, I suck at accents personally. Well, I think the case could be made I do as well. Zombie Wolf says, I'm great at doing Korean and Japanese accents, but I don't think people would appreciate those accents. Yeah, there is, that's a fine line. I don't think I would risk it. Obviously, you can be accurate or not, but yeah. One of the more interesting accents I've heard was a Japanese man who was born and grew up in Jamaica and then moved to Japan later in his life. It was a very singular accent because it was distinctly, that sort of Jamaican with the pigeon in it. But he also very clearly had some influence of his Japanese time. Anyways, I don't know why I'm rambling. I do enjoy stories of good, wild, raucous drunkards. As I've mentioned many times, my favorite story from German folklore, which actually I found out recently is also Jürgen Hubert, who was the translator who introduced me to it. Favorite story in his collection is, I think it's the first story in his collection. It's in the first section anyways, is The Smith of Mitterbach, which I've read on this stream before. It is phenomenal. I love that story so much. And just put it out there, my favorite, I think, overall story remains the Bag of Wind one, and I cannot think of his name, but it was written by a Norwegian man, and I think I found out later he was a bit of a bastard, but that is not uncommon. Nonetheless, I enjoyed his book. I read it some years ago. Anyways. Zombie Wolf says, I'm respectful, which is more than I can say about Mario's accent. Yeah. It is genuinely notable. And we'll just let that one fly. At this point, I think you could probably regard it as an idiolect, but I don't think most people do. I think they just sort of cheapen what is a very wide range of accents, actually. My main interaction with Italian culture, actually, Zombie Wolf, as a cook, is Pasta Grannies on YouTube, which is the thing that all cooks watch because they know their pasta. Although now I can't really make most of it. What am I doing? I'm rambling. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I do actually have things I need to go and do. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you like stories of drunks and folklore, I have done them before. I don't know offhand which ones they were, so you'll just have to watch them all. Maybe at some point I'll put together a playlist of drunken stories. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, everybody in the chat and everybody who lurks. Like the stream if you liked it. I'll keep the fire going for you. Have a good sleep.